My name is Tom. We're going to keep looking at kind of the story of Easter. That's what we're trying to do over these 3 weeks, 4 weeks I think it is, the story of Easter. And tonight we're going to look at one of the key parts, but I just would like to ask a question up front. Okay. It's good somebody knows what we're doing. That helps. So what did you have for lunch, or what did you have for dinner on Tuesday? What did you have for dinner on Tuesday? Fish and rice. Beef casserole on Tuesday. Pasta. What did you have for dinner on the 2nd of December? No looking it up, Michael Carpenter. He's got his food. Did that food do you any good? We get a lot of benefit from the food we eat, don't we? Right? We get a lot of nutrition, a lot of benefit from it. It feeds us. It genuinely feeds us. It builds us stronger. It kind of provides us with all the range of materials that the body requires in order to be able to grow and remain healthy and kind of deal with all the stuff that life brings at us. I wonder what you read in the Bible on Tuesday or on the 2nd of December. You see, so often I think we kind of look at this book and we think, like, if I can't remember what I read, it wasn't worth reading it. I can't remember what I read, so it wasn't worth reading it. But this is food. This stuff's food. It feeds us. It gives us strength to deal with what we're going through. It grows parts of our soul and of our heart and of our mind. And we may not be able to remember the faintest thing that we've read 3 months ago, but it's still fed us. It's still food. So one thing we just want to encourage you to do as a church, as people who are trying to look out for your spiritual well-being, is like, are you eating the good food? Are you reading the Bible? I think of times in my life where I've just gone, and I just realized sort of days or weeks, I think, cool, when was the last time I really read the Bible? When did I do that? It's just kind of dropped out of my life somehow. And so what we're trying to do over these few weeks is equip you with the key story, really, of Jesus. Because the interesting thing about Jesus' life is the key story, the food, the word, is actually about his death. It's about the last week of his life. So we're going to read through a good chunk of that today. And the reason we're doing that is because this is food, and I just want to advocate for that up front. You know, like it's if you've I don't know if anybody ever sort of fasted for medical reasons or for spiritual reasons for a long time, and when you first go back to food after you've fasted, it's like hard work. Like, you just got to be careful and take a few little things and go careful with it. And it can be the same with the Bible. We can find it hard work, but it's still doing us good, and we want to get into it. So this is from John chapter 19. I'm going to read this through, and hopefully it's going to strike you. It's amazing to me. So I'm going to just pray. Jesus, we want to be fed, but it would be amazing if the meal tastes good. I know your word is powerful. It always achieves the purpose for which you've sent it. Jesus, I know that your word cuts between bone and marrow, and builds us up and exposes things to us that we need to see and is for our healing. So I pray that your word would do that. But I pray it be, as we read your word, it would be like a pleasing experience. We'd feel you changing us and making us stronger, because we want to be stronger in our understanding of you, Jesus. We want to know you more, and we sung that, so we pray that. Amen. So Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him in the face. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews, "Look, I'm bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify! Crucify!" But Pilate answered, "You take him and you crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." But the Jews insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law, he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. "Where did you come from?" he asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. The one who handed me over to you is guilty of a great sin." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jews kept on shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of Passover week, about the 6th hour. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priests answered. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. And here they crucified him, and with him two others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city. And the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. The chief priests of the Jews protested to Pilate, "Don't write the King of the Jews, but say that he claimed to be the King of the Jews." Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. This garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. "Let's not tear it," they said to one another. "Let's decide by lot who will get it." This happened that the scripture might be fulfilled, which said, "They divided my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing." So this is what the soldiers did. Okay. That's powerful. It's food. It's food. And as we read this story, I don't know if you know there's this thing called the Apostles' Creed. Sometimes in some schools you used to say it. I don't suppose you do anymore. But in this Apostles' Creed, there's this phrase that says this. He suffered unto Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. Jesus suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. And from looking at this passage, you're like, yes, isn't that what it's saying? Jesus suffered under Pontius Pilate. It's almost like, I don't know if you've ever seen it where some kids, like there's a group of kids together, and they get like a toy, a cuddly toy, which isn't really any of theirs. And they'll pass it round. And some of them, when they get the toy, will be like, oh, this is a nice teddy, and, they're quite okay expressing affection in public. And then there'll be one kid who doesn't want to be the one who kind of cuddles the teddy, so they're like, punching the teddy, and everyone will be like, look what he's doing to the teddy, and then doing all these things with the teddy. And it's almost like that's what happens to Jesus, isn't it? This guy takes him and a bit of affection, but then no, let's punch him, let's mock him, let's stick stuff on him, let's do whatever we want with him. And then he's crucified, and he dies. And then in the bit after this, he's buried. And that is the story of Jesus. That is the story. So that is the story of Easter. That's what happens. And if you could sort of say there's sort of phases of belief, phases of faith, phases of maturity in coming to really knowing Jesus, and that's a great first step. That's kind of the first step towards knowing Jesus, to know the story. Jesus suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. But if you just repeat the Apostles' Creed, and you just kind of read that, and you kind of know that's the story, then you're not, the food isn't really doing its good. You're not really moving on in the faith, because there's a second stage, which is to look deeper and to understand the story. Not just to know the story, but to understand the story. And the thing that's incredible is that what John really pulls out, there's 4 Gospels, I don't know if you know this, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John was written later. And John was like Jesus' mate. He was a really, really good mate, probably his closest friend. And he's seen the 3 Gospels being told, and they're truth, those Gospels. But John's like, yeah, that's true, but there's another thing I just want to bring in, I want to add, because these 3, they tell Jesus as he was, but there's another side to Jesus that I want to bring out. And so John writes his Gospel. And what he does is, if you look back in John's Gospel, the story isn't really that Jesus suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried, but it's actually Jesus chooses to suffer under Pontius Pilate. He chooses to be crucified and to be buried. It's his choice. He's not a rag doll just being passed around at the victim of whatever anybody wants to do to him. Jesus deliberately, intentionally allows this to happen to him. He wants it to happen to him. He chooses this. So if you see in John 18, which we read last week, verse 4, it says Jesus knows everything that was going to happen to him. So he goes out into the garden and says to Judas, who are you looking for? And Judas arrests him. It says in John 18, verse 11, when Peter pulls out his sword and tries to stop them arresting Jesus, Peter says, put the sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? I'm going to drink this. I'm going to take this. I'm going to do this. I want to do this. In John 19, verse 11, sorry, that's not correct. He says, I can't find it. Anyway, Jesus intentionally, he says, he accepts this, he takes this is what he wants. He lets this happen to him. Now, I don't know about you. There's a guy who often comes in the evening service called Martin Tom. Do you know Martin? So about a year ago, I didn't know Martin. And he was like, oh, I've got some spare tickets. There's a leadership conference at HTB run, really nice, in Royal Albert Hall. It's like, they're really expensive tickets. He's like, I've got a spare ticket. Would you like one? So took the spare ticket. I didn't know the guy. And I didn't know whether he sort of felt obligated to kind of offer me a ticket because he'd just kind of, had a spare ticket and felt like as the person leading the church in the church he'd been in a few times, he sort of feels like, oh, maybe I should. And so I met him outside the Royal Albert Hall, and he showed me to his seat. And for the whole day, he just was with me, and I was like, does he want to be with me? Is this like, is he forced into this by circumstances? Or is this what he's choosing to do? It makes a huge difference, doesn't it? If somebody's choosing to do something, that's really different from if they're just being forced to do something. If Jesus is choosing to be passed around like a rag doll, to be passed around, to let things happen to him, that's really different from if it's being forced on him. And what I discovered over the 2 days of the conference is that Martin was choosing to do this for me. He'd actually deliberately bought an extra ticket so he could give it to me. And then he sat with me and then he bought me lunch. And he was like, I'll take you anywhere you want. Choose anywhere you want to go. I'll take you any restaurant you want. I'll buy you lunch. I was like, really? Like, should we just go somewhere really cheap? No, let's go somewhere really nice. And it's like, well, he's choosing to do this. How does that make me feel? It makes me feel so loved. It made me feel so loved. And Jesus, when he comes and he lets this happen to him, if we really want to understand what's happening at Easter, we see Jesus letting the thorns go into his head. We see Jesus letting them mock him. We see Jesus letting them beat him. And we're thinking, you chose to do that for me? That was your choice because you love me. This had to be done and you chose to do it out of love. Out of love for me. This is a choice. If you really look at, I think it's so easy to go through Easter and you kind of almost imagine the cross. And when you imagine the cross, it's so easy just to imagine a blank cross. There's nobody there. And of course, that's a symbol of him having been raised from the dead. But equally, there is the moment where Jesus is there and he's on the cross. And we look at him on the cross and you engage with him and think, hold on a minute, like he's there doing this for you. That's when you move beyond just knowing the story to understanding the story, begin to understand the story. He's choosing this. Jesus chose death. The passage we finished at verse 24, but 25 says this: near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother standing there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, dear woman, here is your son. And to the disciple, here is your mother. From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Later, knowing all that was now completed, and so that the scriptures would be fulfilled, Jesus said, I'm thirsty. A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it and put the sponge on a stalk of the hyssop plant and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he had received the drink, Jesus said, it is finished. With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. That was the verse I was trying to find earlier. Knowing everything had been fulfilled. He'd done it. Jesus, why does he do this? Why does he let this happen to him? Why does he want this to happen to him? It's this verse here. He's saying it needs to be finished. The job needs to be done. He needs to complete the act of love that he wants to fulfill. For you, why did Jesus choose to die? Well, there's many, many books in the Bible which tell you the answer to that question. It's a very, very rich and full answer, which I can't say everything about today. And that's why it's so good to read this book on your own. So good to get into it every day. So much in this. But Jesus here says it's to finish the job. He wants to die to finish the job. But what's the job? What's the job? I may have used this illustration before, but I hope this illustrates to you kind of the job. If you've been to the National Gallery in London, who's been to the National Gallery, like an art gallery? A few people. National Gallery in London. The National Gallery in London is a gallery that contains some of the kind of most highly respected and most valuable masterpieces of art in nearly any nation. I mean, how we got them all, I have no idea. Probably don't want to know. Probably don't want to know. But there's artists like Caravaggio, Van Gogh, Whistler, Turner, and Monet. Like, you kind of walk through room after room, and the paintings, every single one is a masterpiece, hundreds of years old. Like, and the people who painted them took long time. They crafted them carefully. They kind of put everything of themselves into this work, and it's been recognized as this is an incredible piece of art. And so people now, thousands of people every week will go and queue up and look at these masterpieces. And Jesus kind of says that's what people are. That's what people are. You know, we kind of look and think, it's a Caravaggio. It's a Caravaggio, look. Yeah, and you kind of, it's a masterpiece. There's something of the creator, the artist has been put into this. Him. Into him. It's actually a wonder. He's a wonder. And so are you. You're like a Van Gogh, or you're a wonder. You're created by the master artist of all. Creates you. He creates you. And it's a wonder. You're a wonder. But what's happened is that almost like it's one night, somebody's come into the National Gallery and with spray paint and with knives, they've just sprayed and cut and damaged masterpiece after masterpiece after masterpiece. So, and there's not a single masterpiece in the whole of the National Gallery that isn't damaged. And for some, it's the masterpiece is damaged because your parents didn't love you and they rejected you. And for some of the masterpieces, it's damaged because you chose stupid things and you slept with people you shouldn't have slept with and you said things you shouldn't have said and you kind of denied who you truly were. And for other people, it's all this whole range of damage has been done on you. It's been done on you. It's been done on you. And it's like, how can this be fixed? How can you? If a Monet is damaged, how could it ever be restored back to what it was? It's a damaged masterpiece. But there's one way it could be restored. There's one way a Monet, if it's been damaged, could actually be repaired into being even maybe more than what it originally was. And that would be if Monet himself came back to that painting and Monet himself did the work to make it a Monet, a restored Monet. And Caravaggio went back to his work and he restored the Caravaggio with his work. And when Jesus says it is finished, it's on the cross, there's a bit of technical stuff in here because in the Bible, it's really clear. What it says is that it's the blood of a person in whom there's life. So your life is in your blood. And it's almost like God created you with blood. And then therefore he needs to recreate you, to fix you. He as the artist can repair you, can restore the masterpiece that was in you, that you are. He can restore that with his blood. And so Jesus comes. And it's as he dies, it's almost like the blood falls into the artist's palate. Ready to be restored. He can restore was it Caravaggio? He can restore the Caravaggio. He can restore it. It's finished. And the invitation to Damien then is, will you let him use his blood to restore you? Because he's done what he needs to do. Will you let him restore you to the masterpiece? It's finished. This is what the cross is about. It's Jesus' restoring work. Jesus means a whole lot more when he says it is finished. But that is so much at the root of it. His desire to provide for your restoration back to the person he created you and intended you to be. And the story of Easter, if you understand it, you understand that here is a God who is willing to pay the highest price of all to offer you the chance to be restored to who he wants you to be. If you understand it, it's a God who's actually just makes himself so weak and so small and allows himself to be passed around to give you the chance to be restored. And can I say, this is really important because this is different. This thing that Jesus does is different from anything you find elsewhere. In no other religion do you find a God who pays a price for you. In no kind of philosophy in our world do you ever come across this. So it's really alien. I'm just going to read a little quote, which is... See, we have many Muslims in Croydon. We love them. We love them. And the thing that we want to... the thing that in Islam is that, as far as I understand it, and as in reading on it, the Quran does not provide for the God to take on the debt, the guilt of his creation. At least 5 times the Quran says that no soul shouldn't bear another's burden. And indeed it says, if a laden soul cries out for help, not even a near relation shall share its burden, because each man shall reap the fruit of his own deeds. It's so rare to have God himself who will pay the price, who will take the burden for you. That's unique in Jesus. You don't get that anywhere else. So much of kind of standard understanding of life is based on a guy called Nietzsche, who's a philosopher who built his stuff off Darwin, who you probably heard of, Charles Darwin. And Nietzsche loved Darwin's emphasis of the survival of the fittest. And so it caused him to despise weakness. And he dreamt of the emergence of a Superman and a daring ruler race. And he looked on what Jesus did on the cross, and he actually did understand it. He understood what Jesus did on the cross, because he says what Jesus does on the cross is he takes the side of everything weak. Jesus was taking the side of anything weak on the cross. But for Nietzsche, he hated that. He hated the idea that Jesus would side with the weak. He called it Christianity the religion of pity. And so he wanted it to be destroyed, because it thwarted the idea of evolution, that you get what you deserve, that the strong will flourish and the weak will die off. I wonder if in the core of your soul there's a Christian heart, there's a Christian narrative in how you think about yourself, or whether there's a kind of a narrative that's more like what it says in the Quran, or a narrative more like what Nietzsche says, where the narrative is, if I do something wrong, I'm going to pay. I bear my burden. I deserve this. I have to deal with this. Is that your narrative inside your heart? Is your narrative inside your heart that you look down on weakness, that you despise failure? You only celebrate things that are strong? Or will you buy into Jesus' way? Well, he says it's finished. I will bear your burden, he says. And I will stand with those who are weak. And when you're weak, somehow, incredibly, that's when he's shown to be strong. That's what it means to really understand the cross. And the early church, they really loved the cross. I wonder sometimes whether in our kind of, we would call ourselves evangelicals, and we kind of open to the gifts of the Spirit. And I sometimes wonder, look, if you're here and you're kind of, this stuff really matters to you, do we sometimes lose the cross slightly to the side? Does it sometimes get slightly pushed to the side in our lives? We sung about it a lot tonight, and I loved that. I loved that. Because the cross has to be central for us, because this is what shows us who our God is. This is what they did in the early church. This is Tertullian, who lived about 200 AD. So He said at every forward step and movement, at every going in and out, when we put on our clothes, when we put on our shoes, when we have a bath, when we sit at a table, when we put the lights on, when we sit down for a rest, when we're doing the ordinary actions of life, we trace upon the forehead the sign of the cross. The sign of the cross. He just wanted this cross thing to be in his mind and to define him so much that everything he did, he actually marked on his head the cross. I've never done that before. Actually, that feels quite weird and quite nice. This is what he did because he wanted the cross to be the thing. Like, this is where God pays for you. It's not about you. It's where God loves you. He wanted it. And there's another guy called Hippolytus. Or Hippolytus, maybe, but I think he should have been called Hippolytus. And he said this, whenever he's tempted, I wonder if anybody here is ever tempted. If you're ever tempted, this is what he did. Always seal your forehead with the sign of the cross. This sign of the passion is displayed and made manifest against the devil, if you do it in faith. Not so that people see it, but so that you know you're putting it forward as a shield. It's like this temptation comes. It's like sensation that, I'm struggling, God. My mind's going everywhere. I'm getting overwhelmed with my anxiety. I'm really struggling here. And it's like, okay, I'm going to mark on my head this sign of the cross. This is my shield. These anxious thoughts shall not rule me because Christ died on the cross for me. He's claimed me. He's won me. I'm his. It's finished. I'm going to put that on myself. Stress is building up within me. And now I'm going to mark that thing. This is what I do. I love it. Don't you love it? Some of you love it. And this is where you begin to move to the third step. So the first step is to know the story. The second is to understand the story. And the third is to embody the story. It's to embody the story. And what I love is that bit where Jesus says to John, he's dying on the cross, and he looks down, he says, right, John, you're now her son. And his own mum, he says, now you are his mother. And what Jesus is doing on the cross, he's creating the ability to embody living out of the cross. Living a life that flows from the cross. And that life that flows from the cross that he's speaking out, it's where there's a new family dynamic in your life. And I think there's two aspects of this. The first one is this. When Jesus' mother becomes your mother, and this is what Paul and Peter and John talks about all the time, you become Jesus' brother or sister. He becomes your brother. Now, I don't know what you think of. When you get to the stage where Jesus actually feels to you like a brother, you're living a life out of the cross. You're living a life that's flowing from that, because the sense of companionship that you feel with him, the sense that you know him and he knows you and you're together. It's a wonderful thing. And maybe there'll be many people here who haven't got a brother, or who've got a brother they don't like. But you still, even though you haven't had those things, there's still something in every single one of us that understands what it is to have a brother who really gets us. Just this week, I have two brothers, one older brother, one younger brother. Neither of them live nearby, but my older brother was just around. He was there at church this morning in St. Mary's. We saw him yesterday, saw him on Friday. We don't see each other a lot, and we never speak on the phone or text or anything. No, there's no communication for 6 or 8 months of the year, and then we'll see one another. Anybody else like that? Yeah. Yeah. Leslie speaks to her brothers all the time. It makes me sick. But I don't. I'm just not wired like that. But when I see him, there's this sense of there's a companionship. There's this deep sort of, you're my brother. We've shared life together, ups and downs. And are you in that place with Jesus? When you look and you think of Jesus, is it like wow, we've walked a road together. We've walked a road together, Jesus. That's what we're talking about. That's what John talks about. He says our fellowship is with the Father and with the Son. It's like we've walked a road together. We're together. Nothing can separate that now. And the second thing is, of course, Jesus makes a new family. And that's why, like, if you really want to do this thing, follow Jesus well, if you want to live a life out of the cross, if you want to do that badly, the best thing to do is to not speak to other people. To kind of form all kinds of reasons why you would rather not engage with somebody. Oh, I don't, they don't really, I meet a lot of Christians and they'll be like, they kind of want to be mature Christians, but they'll find reasons why they don't really want to spend time with other people. This guy, they're not very mature in their faith. So, they say silly things, so I don't want to spend time with them. I'm like, well, it's a good job Jesus doesn't do that with you. So we deliberately and intentionally build things like Toast and breaks into our services. We deliberately, intentionally create stuff in small groups. Well, but we actively just want to encourage you. Like, there's introverts and extroverts. You don't have to spend all your time with people. But sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do, the greatest sense of growth in your life with Jesus, is to talk to somebody who's a bit different from you and to treat them like your brother or your sister. Don't be cliquey. Don't be cliquey. That's one of the worst things. Don't be cliquey. A life lived out of the cross is never cliquey. It's never like that. It's always, okay, I embrace you as my brother. It doesn't mean I'm going to spend every minute of the day with you. But I look at you and I choose to embrace you as a brother or a sister. Okay, that's it. So, how are we doing, Henry? All right. Stayed awake. Well done. Shall we pray? Jesus, we want to invite you to stir in our hearts the depth of your love for us. Just as you're praying now, maybe if you could close your eyes, that might help. You don't have to. And as you close your eyes, I want you to just to imagine Jesus on the cross. I want you to imagine going up to the foot of the cross. And you look up at him. And he's looking at you. And there will be an interaction between you and him. And just allow that interaction to play out in your imagination. He'll ask you some questions. Holy Spirit, lead us in that right now, please.